For all the talk of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Phase 4 doesn't have a singular cohesive main theme, Ms. Marvel ties a big red bow on the fact that at least its running B-plot is crystal clear, introducing and locking down the Marvel-Disney ideal of the teen and young adult superhero as a provably ambitious good troublemaker, joining Kate Bishop, Peter Parker, Tommy and Billy, presumably in America Chavez, in Disney's rapidly expanding child soldier militia of honor students who will kick your ass, but also still remember to take out the trash and call grandma on her birthday, as incarnated by newcomer and, as marketing is at great eagerness to remind us, real-life Marvel movie fanatic Iman Vellani. Our setup here is an origin narrative for Kamala, a Pakistani-American Muslim teenager living in New Jersey, for whom the push and pull between being a regular teenager and her devotion to faith and family is mirrored by the similar schism between the rest of her life and her somewhat excessive fandom for all things Avengers and her favorite hero, in the reality of the MCU, still somewhat mysterious Captain Marvel, aka Carol Danvers especially. I'm not 100% sure if being obsessed with superheroes in a world where they exist and all these movies happen makes someone more like a celebrity stan or people who are really big into UFOs, but the show doesn't seem to be either, other than it makes her seem like sort of a nerdy outcast at school, and her family doesn't really get it either, particularly her mother, who disapproves of the unmodest Captain Marvel cosplay, among other things. Now, this all takes a turn when Kamala incorporates a mysterious bracelet supposedly once belonging to her great-grandmother into a cosplay for a local convention and finds herself having strange visions and suddenly manifesting superhuman powers, not from the bracelet itself, but activated from within her. But since she's living in an MCU where this kind of thing happens a lot, actually, she pretty much jumps to the conclusion and the opportunity straight on that this is exactly what her life has been missing and she should just do the superhero thing. What could go wrong? Oh, hey, weird anti-superhero police cops, whatever, from that last Spider-Man movie. The first 2 of 6 episodes were made available to press prior to the series debut, so this is an impression sans rating strictly based on that, and no spoilers beyond episode 1, but so far this feels like a winner. It's extremely refreshing, it doesn't try to be too big or do too much all at once, it takes its time, wisely keeps the focus on the characters and building out the exterior world and family dynamics, making this feel like a warm, lived-in place so you understand what the stakes are when it presumably will inevitably come under attack when things go south later on. And it feels strange to say after so many projects, but this more than anything hits like Marvel Studios finally has their answer to the early 2000s Spider-Man movies in terms of a young hero origin story, rooted deeply in the specific sense of place and energy, though here that rooting is in a gauzy romanticism for a working-class Muslim neighborhood in New Jersey versus Sam Raimi's nostalgic retro-Americana New York, but the vibes are similar and strongly felt, especially after seeing hints of that affect make a comeback in Doctor Strange 2. Now, Ms. Marvel, the comic book character, is that rare creation 3 or 4 times over, depending how you look at her before you even get to the specifics. A character willed into being as part of a build-up to a big reshape the dynamics of the publisher's continuity for corporate synergy purposes that ultimately went nowhere and everyone hated except for her, a superhero whose civilian backstory and identity have been generally more compelling and a bigger part of her overall endurance than the superheroics by design that fans have actually warmed to, and most incredibly of all, a character created after the early 1990s by one of the 2 big publishers that's actually popular and has actual fans. I mean, seriously, I don't think people appreciate it this much. To the degree that Dead Tree Publishing in itself is kind of an over medium, comics themselves are mainly sold to guys my age who've been reading them forever and very small number of new non-legacy fans. Like, the garbage doesn't sell, the good stuff doesn't sell, the stuff that's made by washed out guys who've gone all right-wing and only sell to their own guys on Patreon to support their YouTube podcasts only sell like that. Like, outside of manga and indie publishing, stuff made by Marvel and DC is really just inexpensive test kitchen material for movies to be later made by Disney and Warner Brothers at this point. Some of it very good, but it does not make money on its own. So when a character like Kamala Khan breaks out, it's sort of a big deal because these things generally are not money-making enterprise at this point. So yeah, Kamala Khan, a rarity carrying with her the gift and burden of being eminently adaptable, but also maybe like too wide open, since what little baggage she carries with her could be said to be overcomplicated. Her original backstory was tied to the Inhumans, a franchise nobody cares about, turned into a TV show nobody liked. Part of her original gimmick was being tied to legacy aspects of the Captain Marvel brand that don't exist in the live-action movie version of that same property, and her power set of having size-changing elastic stretch powers is charitably difficult to pull off in live action, at least so far. Now, on the fortunate side, as mentioned, the biggest thing the character has always had going for her, what's always driven her relative popularity, popularity, which despite what you will now hear for the next decade or so from propagandists here on YouTube, comment section, tomato meter user reviews, and the rest of the reasons never to listen to the internet open sewer, is a real thing and not some hologram conspiracy by, I don't know, George Soros or whoever is behind the woke Illuminati conspiracy this week, is the aspects of her character not married to Marvel continuity matters, i.e. that she was a fresh take on the Peter Parker model of a working-class teenage hero whose adventures and difficulties balancing her two lives were an allegory for a real kid's everyday life, and in this case, the everyday life of a Pakistani-American girl from New Jersey who just wants to find her place in a bigger world but also not lose connection to her family and identity. So the new cinematic universe incarnation of the character, debuting here on Disney Plus miniseries before a scheduled glow-up on the big screen in the Marvels next year, aims to square it off by putting her origin story away from any bigger universe-wide event, at least so far. Like I said, at the time, critics were only able to view the first 2 episodes of the series, with a new twist on where the powers come from, and they're also playing it kind of mysterious as to what else might be involved in place of or addition to the Inhumans, though I think the series tips its hand as to who or what mother relatively obscure Marvel thing might be in a conversation between 2 characters about 18 minutes into the first episode. I won't spoil what I think it is outright here, other than to say what jumped out at me was on the lines of, I don't speak Urdu or Arabic fluently, but I don't also think that's a word 2 people who spoke either would toss in as a generic term for something while otherwise speaking English to each other in this context, unless they're making sure a presumed mainly English-speaking audience remembers it later on. And then as of episode 2, I felt even more strongly, okay, I think I know who's coming, and if I'm right, that's gonna be interesting. But what's interesting about where all of this seems to be going in terms of inner narrative and on the meta level, what can really be avoided when your character is like her namesake named for the studio, how little the much talked up adaptational switches seem to matter thus far into the story, but also how much they serve to strengthen the character's always strongly intended purpose as a new generation symbol for what a Marvel hero is supposed to represent, both on the idealistic end and on the more cynical business-driven side. She's Miss Marvel here implicitly because her real power comes from being a Marvel fan, with the undercurrent being something like a subversion of the old girl from a traditional conforming culture wants to break out and be free by conforming to American teenage culture genre tropes, wherein the big takeaway here is meant to be more like, no, actually, devoted consumer fandom for Disney Marvel product and sincere conviction to whatever your background are perfectly compatible, complementary in fact. Welcome to Main Street USA, buy a lightsaber. Which, hey, you know what they say, no ethical consumption, etc, etc, etc. What I've seen of the series thus far is very promising. The directors of the first episode also did Bad Boys 3, and they're on Batgirl next, presently. The next 2 are from Mina Marin, who did Farrah Goes Bang. It's an eclectic looking show so far. The supporting cast is interesting, and while it's not 100% clear where the bigger plot is headed, because so much of it is really about the background and the world, I get a sense really cool stuff is in the offing. I'm looking forward to where it's going, but so far Vellani is an instant superstar in the lead, and you should check it out on the strength of her lead performance alone. Supporting cast, like I said, very interesting. Episode 2 left off on a cliffhanger of, oh, okay, that's going to be an interesting switch up. The whole thing is a real find. Definitely recommend it. Check it out.